Howdy, folks. We're glad that you're back with us. Welcome. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. I hope that this will be a great first episode for you. And either way, we're certainly glad that you've decided to join us for a little bit here as we talk about a very important subject, as we'll come to see. I hope that if you have been listening to Kentuckian for a little bit, you've noticed already a pretty big difference, especially once we've started the videos here recently. I've said before, I'm working out a lot of the stuff with video quality and getting used to the differences in producing a video as opposed to a audio episode regularly. And I've had a friend work with me. We've managed to work on the audio quite a bit, so you should notice a massive improvement compared especially to the videos and probably even to the old audio episodes. So hopefully that's something that you all can appreciate. I'm certainly excited that we're keeping to improve the quality of the videos here. But anyway, let's get into the subject at hand. We're talking about something very important. We're talking about peace, something I've actually wanted to talk about for a little while now. It's no secret to y'all that the state of this country and even the world is, well, turbulent right now. That's probably a massive understatement. In many parts of the world, there isn't peace. Of course, in Russia and Ukraine, in Ukraine with Russia, I should say, there's fighting actively going on. And there's serious concern about whether we'll be able to maintain a peaceful lifestyle in this country. There's rising crime and the continued massive polarization of the very, very different worldviews and belief systems that exist in this country today. And if all that doesn't boil over, if that powder keg doesn't blow, so to speak, well, there's another thing that very well could tip things into the balance of massive disruption. For those that pay perhaps a bit more attention to things going on, but I think in a lot of ways people recognize it or know it, whether they recognize it to themselves or not. The government, the United States government itself, is recognized as a large threat to our continued peace. What with the IRS trying to hire an army of new agents, although if I understand correctly, that part of what they were trying to do has been struck down. I hope it has, and I hope that that's a permanent arrangement. Sometimes things can be temporarily struck down, but they're trying to hire an army of new agents, renewed attacks on the Second Amendment recently, the FBI labeling everyone that uses some of the most basic patriotic imagery as potential, in their words, militia violent extremists, and so on, are all examples of serious threats from the government to whether we're going to be able to remain peaceful or not. However, as much as people may want peace, especially in this country, there is a significant lack of understanding of what peace actually is and how it's maintained. You know, there's real life, there's reality, and then there's what most Americans think. Seriously, though, Americans do have a very insulated view of the world and how things work. We are extremely blessed in this country. We have more material blessings than we can fathom. We can have constant entertainment. We can do things and say things and participate in things, whether that be entertainment or education stuff or social activism or anything like that. And you can probably think of other examples. We can participate and spend time and money on things that not only would most of the rest of the world not even be able to dream of, they actively laugh at us for doing, because they realize how unrealistic and how out of touch with reality it is. And Americans, by and large, are just really out of touch with reality. However, we don't need to accept that. Once we recognize that fact, we need to reject that way of thinking. I'm not going to live in a bubble. Things can change here. All the things that we used to say could never happen here, they could happen here, and I want to be ready for it. I want to deal with the world in a realistic manner, and we look to have a more realistic view of the world. And hopefully this episode will help with that some. I would ask you, if we're not realistic about how the world actually works, say we want peace or justice or righteousness or some other desirable social outcome, right? If we're not realistic about how the world actually works, is it reasonable for us to expect consistent, desirable results in our efforts to achieve justice or righteousness or whatever, peace? I think you all probably are going to answer no to that, but I do want to give you one example to help kind of bring that illustration into focus a little bit. Say you want to bake a cake. Just keep it simple, a basic boxed birthday cake. You want to bake a cake. But you want to change it up a little bit, and you decide, I know there's a recipe on the back, but I'm not going to follow it. I'm going to do what feels good. I'm going to add extra sugar because I don't like that those cakes aren't sweet enough. And, I'm going to throw in some fruit pieces because I want a little bit of fruit flavor in my cake. And I'm going to leave the eggs out because, I don't need eggs in there. And I'm going to replace the milk with water. You all get what I'm getting at. If you do that, is it reasonable to expect that you're going to get a decent cake out of the oven when it's finished? The answer, of course, obviously being no. And that's really the same idea we're talking about here. If we're not realistic about the way the world works, we can't expect to have a good outcome. So let's get into the first question about peace. Why does peace often not exist? Now, I want you to tell me. Go down into pause the video, go down into the comments, and tell me some reasons why you think peace doesn't exist, and then we'll talk about it. That way, we get some algorithms working here and helps my video get seen more, and you all get to participate a little bit more actively in this episode. So go ahead and tell me, why do you think peace doesn't exist sometimes? Now, once you're back from that, let's talk about some of the reasons. And I would imagine you all put in some pretty good answers. There's a kind of an instinctual ability to latch on to some of those things and to understand it. But let's get a little more specific. Let's get a little more detailed and think it through a little more. Fundamentally, peace doesn't exist because of sin and evil. Now, that's the overall basic, as broad as it can get. Let's bring it into focus a little bit more. Think about things like selfishness. I want something and I'm going to have it no matter what it costs to somebody else. Greed, usually applied a little more specifically to money, but still very selfish. I want money above anything else, and I'll do whatever it takes to get it. I'll take it from somebody by force if I need to, or I'll hurt somebody to get into a position where I can make more money. Lust, which isn't always sexual, by the way, but a really strong desire for something, and generally an evil desire for something. Desperation. Sometimes people just don't see any way out. Pride. Well, you can't say that to my country. We're going to declare war on you unless you recant. And they won't recant because they're prideful, and then we have a war. Misguided intention. Sometimes people think that they're going to do good for other people, but they have to apply it by force. Or religious tenets, especially some religions that specifically teach holy war and those sorts of things. All of these are examples of where a lack of peace comes from, why peace doesn't always exist. But what do you think? Those are the reasons why, the fundamental reasons why. But what do you think the key to this question in understanding why peace doesn't exist is? There's a different key that we really need to latch on to and understand. And if it's the one thing that you take from this video, I'd say this would be what I'm about to say. Not everyone looks for a fight, but it often comes anyway. Not everyone looks for a fight, but it often comes anyway. We need to understand that peace is a two-party affair. We can be the most righteous, upright, peaceful, humble, selfless people out there. But all it takes is somebody that isn't, somebody that is selfish, somebody that has greed and lust and envy and all those things, and see something that you have that they want, or see something that you have that they don't want you to have, and they're going to take it by force. That's why peace doesn't exist. We can be as peaceful as possible, but if we're not realistic about it, we're going to have the wool pulled over our eyes, because it's not just us. And that's what we really need to recognize. Evil exists. People commit evil, and that's why peace is destroyed. Again, we kind of came back to where we started with that, but it is true. People are evil sometimes, and they will not allow peace to be maintained. But that brings us to our next point. How is peace actually achieved? We understand the nature of peace a little better. But then how do we get peace? How do we achieve peace? At least as much as we can on our part. And the first thing, and you may have heard this before, it's in order to be peaceful, you must be able to commit violence. You must think about the ability to commit violence, using that different. And just to be clear, and this is for the purposes of YouTube, I'm not saying that you should commit violence. It's a theoretical way of saying is what I'm about to get into. Think about the ability to commit violence more generally as the ability to project power. Okay, so take the violence part out of it, the ability to project power. In order to be peaceful, you must have power. If you cannot or will not use that power, you have no power. Even if you theoretically could do something, even if you theoretically could defend yourself, Second Amendment, whatever, if you're not willing to use it, you still effectively have no power. Peace is the only option. Someone else dictates the terms in whatever way suits them, because, putting it frankly, if you're either cannot or will not use the power that you have, what are you going to do to stop them? Remember, we're not talking about regular people just talking and working things out. We're talking about someone who generally is going to be evil and is going to force their will on you unless you can stop them. Another point about peace being practically achieved, you can only sue for peace. You can only try to maintain or to create peace from a position of power. If someone's looking to pick a fight and you don't have the power to stop them, say it's a country wanting to invade another country that has a weak military that they know they can take care of really easily, you can't work for peace. If country A is really aggressive and they have a powerful military, and country B, your country, is not aggressive, but it also doesn't have a powerful military, if they say we are going to do X, you're going to do X, Y, and Z for us, we're going to declare war, what's your bargaining power? What's your leverage? You don't have any. They've determined that they're going to walk all over you. Might makes right to them. Remember, it goes back to that idea of evil. And so might is all they're going to recognize in negotiations. They've decided that they'll take what they want if that's what it takes. So the only way they're not going to take what they want is if they're either actually stopped, or if they think that they're going to be stopped, or it's going to cost more than they want to pay to actually take it. Countries often do this in the final actions of a war. Criminals will do it if they get caught. You think about, well, I'll make a deal with you. If you give me a lighter sentence, then I'll reveal these people's names, right? They have leverage. So like, okay, well, I want something out of it and I have some power, so I'm going to use it to put myself in a more favorable condition. Countries will do it in war, as I mentioned, if we can take this position, this really strategic position, and hold it, then even though we're losing, what's going to happen is they're going to have to spend a lot of troops, they're going to have to spend a lot of money and a lot of resources to take this spot, so we can use that as leverage to get better terms of surrender. Businessmen will do it with negotiations and business buyouts, maybe buy certain stocks or sell certain stocks. They'll have certain capital available, or they'll have certain things ready to offer to the company they want to buy in order to make it an offer they can't refuse. Even hostile takeovers are kind of an illustration of that, where they set them up to where if they don't accept the negotiation, they're going to potentially fail as a business, right? Germany in World War II did this. A lot of the final actions of the German army was either trying to get themselves in a better position for surrender, or simply trying to surrender to the Americans as opposed to the Russians. They literally fought in some cases to try and get to American lines so they could surrender to them instead of being captured or destroyed by the Russians, because the Russians were extremely brutal and most Germans didn't want to be captured by a Soviet. You think about the atom bomb used in Japan, both atom bombs used in Japan in World War II. Whether there's arguments whether it worked like it was meant to or not, the idea was to say, we can completely annihilate you all. And we don't want to do it. So we're giving you all a chance to surrender, but we're showing that we can just annihilate everything. And we're willing to do it, basically, to win this war. So it puts Japan it tries to force them to the bargaining table, because Japan didn't even want to surrender for most of the war. That's a whole different thing there. MAD during the Cold War, which is mutually assured destruction. The idea being, okay, yeah, you have nukes, but we have nukes too. And if you launch your nukes, even a small strike, well, we're going to retaliate. So there's no way that you can win by using nukes. You launch nukes, we launch nukes, the world's over, effectively was kind of the argument, right? So that was probably a large part in keeping nukes from ever being used during the Cold War. Because nobody wanted to, okay, yeah, we launched a nuke, we destroyed America, the Soviets say, but now we don't have a country left either. There's nowhere in the world left to live. So what's the point in using them? That's the idea, right? That position of power and being able to use that power to get what you want, which oftentimes is peace. It's kind of like the TV shows or the movies you see where there's some guy, he's probably drunk at a bar, right? And there's our protagonist, the main character, and the guy at the bar starts to pick a fight with him. It's like, oh, what's going on here? And he's trying to find something to fight over. And then the protagonist's massive, mountain of a man buddy walks up behind him and, growls at the drunk guy. And all of a sudden he steps back. He's like, I'm, and stumbles and walks away and just mumbles and swaggers about a little bit to make his pride feel better. And of course, that's kind of a humorous example, but it shows that idea. Effectively, what he's saying is, yeah, you can try and take us, but it's way riskier. You might win, but you're going to feel it. You're going to pay for it, right? You're going to pay dearly for it. And so it keeps the peace, right? It keeps that fight from ever happening. And that's an example of that as well. And we also need to recognize that America is designed for this kind of projection of power if we use the tools that are available to us. The idea behind the militia in general was to keep the balance of power in the hands of the people. The Founding Fathers were very much opposed to a standing army, often a standing army at all, and those that were in favor of a standing army rarely, if ever, were in favor of anything more than a very, very small professional army. Because guess what? The government can't tyrannize people if it doesn't have the soldiers to do it with. And the thing with a militia-based defense system, guess what? The people can project power. The people can stop the government if something happens. And then you also still have protection against foreign invaders. This was something, and I don't know, I haven't been able to find yet if it was ever confirmed, but there's a rumor anyway that went around that Admiral Yamamoto during World War II, he was a Japanese admiral that engineered or was responsible for the attack on Pearl Harbor. And Admiral Yamamoto supposedly said at one point during the war that we could never invade the United States because there would be a rifle behind every blade of grass. Even if the Japanese could somehow take the continent, it would be so costly, there's no way that it would justify the expense of blood, and you couldn't hold it, right? But that brings us to the last point, and that is what is not peace. And this is something we do need to recognize as well. We've talked about how you achieve peace. You have power and you're willing to use it. And in America, we have many options: militias, voting, boycotts, calling campaigns to let the will of the people be known to your senators or representatives, recalls, all those different things where the people can project power to influence the way things are supposed to go. And I recognize that's not where it used to be. We talked about what it is and how it's maintained, but what isn't it? And let me explain that a little bit. There are times where we may not be in conflict with someone or some nation or some organization, and we might call it peace, but it's not really peace. And that's what I'm getting at. If you're saying that you're living a peaceful life and you're not doing anything with your life, you're just a lazy bum and you're calling it peaceful, like that's somehow a virtue in and of itself, just because you're not in conflict with people. That's not peaceful. That's just being lazy. That's just being unproductive. And that's probably a little bit more of an unlikely scenario, but it might get you thinking too. Maybe think of like the hippies from the 70s and everything. They were living a peaceful life, but all they were doing was, doing drugs and committing fornication. And it was harmful and it wasn't peaceful. It was just a turbulent, immoral ride, right? Just following and chasing pleasure wherever they could. But they'd had their peace sign, so that somehow made it all right. Another example of what is not peace is not being willing to take a stand, the result being that no conflict occurs. Someone is committing evil, someone is harassing you, someone is attacking you, and you're not willing to do anything about it. And maybe they leave you alone for the moment. Maybe they're a bully or something like that at school. It's just one example I guess you could use. That's not being peaceful, it's being subjugated. It's just you're not willing to take a stand. Being stripped of the ability to project power is not being peaceful. Again, to be peaceful, you have to be able to project power. If power is stripped from you, you're not peaceful because you have no other option. You can't do anything about it. Being tyrannized, very much along the same lines, right? That's not being peaceful, it's being subjugated. Getting rowdy for the wrong reasons, picking fights just to pick fights, or on a larger scale, warmongering. Fighting for the wrong reason is obviously not being peaceful, and it is evil as well. Doing nothing when war is upon you, and I've kind of referred to this a little bit, but sitting back and taking a beating effectively, whether that's individually or as a country, that's not being peaceful. That's just sitting back and taking a beating, and in many cases, even rejecting responsibilities that you have to your fellow man and to God, but that's a little bit of a separate issue from this. It's like you keep looking for a reason not to defend yourself when there's things happening all around you that anybody else in any right frame of mind would consider war or would consider conflict that can't go unanswered. And then the last example is being silent at times when moral courage and fortitude is required. And it's not talking about fighting, right? Maybe you're working for justice or righteousness. Those things need to be stood for, or similar issues that are at stake that again don't require necessarily fighting, physical fighting, but still require moral courage and a moral fight, and you're not willing to take that stand. So I hope that this has given you all a really great refresher course, perhaps, or a great primer course on peace, what it is, how it's maintained, and what isn't peace. This is something that we need to be very mindful of because, again, as Americans, we're very spoiled. We're very out of touch with reality. We live in a bubble, and we need to wake up. We need to pop that bubble. We need to realize that the reality of the world around us. I hope you found this episode enjoyable. I hope that you'll share it with others. We have some new designs in the shop that will be coming out soon. Don't forget about the merch store. But we have at least 1 or 2 new designs that will be out soon. So stay posted for that. Follow Facebook, Instagram. Those are social media pages. And anything that you can do to help, liking videos, sharing videos, just telling your buddies about it, that makes a big difference. We need to expand our audience. We can do good here, and you all can help do good with the Kentuckian. I'm excited about what's to come. We've got some exciting things in the works. I've been working on some of the shorts videos, which is a new kind of content that I'm going to be making. So there should be something out by the end of the month on that. It's been kind of a crazy month, but there should be something available soon, at least the first one. And I'm really excited about all that. I hope that you all have a wonderful week. I hope that you all are productive, that you all remember what's right. And if you would like to follow the Kentuckian and support the Kentuckian in a more personal way, would like to get access, more exclusive access to me and things like discounts on merchandise and that sort of stuff, consider supporting my Patreon. That really makes a big difference in what I'm able to do, and I'm able to connect with you all much more directly. Remember, friends, that as long as you and I are doing what's right, we'll make a real difference in this old world. This has been Ryan Dalton of the Kentuckian, signing off.